this exercise and my butt still sags. Why? Well, let's look at the exercise now that we have rehabilitated their intrinsic system, now that we have integrated with all their slings and the outer unit systems. We're ready to start exercising and working that butt. And so we might ask them what they have been doing that potentially they thought was working to create a fabulous butt, but did not so much. Well, in this particular picture, we already said that the glute is a phasic muscle that needs a large stimulus for activation. So part of exciting the glute would take first of all, a great amount of hip flexion and extension to activate, and it's a power muscle. It's phasic, it's not tonic. And so walking on the treadmill with a short gait, not exactly going to excite the glute max to hypertrophy. Okay, walking is an aerobic exercise, and it's more for the tonic action of muscles, not phasic. So walking is certainly not going to do anything for the glute max if you're trying to hypertrophy that muscle. Running, well, we'll talk about a particular type of running that will suit the glute max, but running on the treadmill jogging on the treadmill isn't going to activate any glutes, especially if you're doing like a 30-minute jog. Oftentimes, if you're familiar with runners, they typically have sort of saggy, weak glutes because they run for long periods of time, and a glute max would need short bursts. One of my favorites. So this is a great exercise for your calves. So doing the Stairmaster with short little dorsiplantar flexion movements through the ankle serves for calf development and not glutes. Now, if she were to take that movement and have a larger than 90-degree hip flexion and knee flexion, now you're talking. So she would be better suited to get on a step mill and skip 2 or 3 steps and take large steps in order to activate getting that glute max. And as this shows, and you also see in the gym, people tend to put their arms on the handles and lock out their elbows and take the load off the lower extremity because they're tired. And that's really a tricep workout. That's not a glute activation exercise at all. So besides the fact that the machine is doing most of the work for you, I thought that the glutes were really, they're supposed to be integrated with the rest of the body. And so this is not so much of an exercise that I would deem good, because really and truly it's for the purpose of no carryover. The machine, the question is what are you going to do in daily life that mimics this type of movement and stabilizes your body? I can't think of one. So, terrible exercise. So, let's look at again at the knees. The primary working muscle, yes, is the quads. There's absolutely no leverage on the hip. And look at the leverage on the knee. And if you ask somebody that's doing this exercise when they get off of it, what they're actually feeling, like what muscle they feel like they're actually working, they're going to tell you your quads. The good thing is from my perspective, we're going to look at the positive aspect of this picture. At least she's not shearing the knee joint. At least she's got a 90-degree from it, and it's not exceeding the toes. We look at the center of gravity and how it moves forward in this functional squat. This is the best on the right, the best exercise to do a squat pattern. This particular squat pattern is a front squat, where we have the quadriceps and the hamstrings co-contracting to stabilize the forward flexion and putting the knee in a nice position to basically create stress on it so that it gets stronger. And also, if you'll see, there is more than 90 degrees from knee and hip flexion, which is a great exercise to stimulate glute maximum efforts. And because she's working a phasic muscle, or if her purpose is to work the hip extensors and the glutes, more than likely she's not doing more than 8 to 10 repetitions at a tempo of 1-1-1 or 1-2-1. Smart butt or stupid butt? Make sure or qualify this exercise that you maintain center of gravity over your base of support, that you have postural activation, inner unit activation. It's important that the inner unit and outer unit integrate together in their sequence, that there is a reflex profile, meaning you're going to do your squat in a riding reflex, or you can do it in a tilting or equilibrium reflex. Also a great exercise that works the glutes that you can determine can be open chain or closed chain. Most importantly, determining the exercise that benefits you the most, that's going to carry over into your natural environment. These are some great exercises that we teach within our system that determines and gives you a great, fabulous glute. The one to the far left, if you see that one, is a cross box step up, which is really good because it's working eccentric and concentric glute. And it's about 30 degrees at the knee joint, but really good for maintaining frontal plane stability within the glute med and glute max. That would be considered in that particular situation a phase 3 exercise. Why? Because it is axial loaded and she is adding external load to it. So if someone is ready for that particular level, phase 3, great exercise, highly recommend it. Then we have the center exercise, which is a phase 1 exercise. And this is once you've got your rehab with your isolation to integrate and we're ready to start moving into an exercise program. This is not only an exercise, but can also be a test to see whether or not the glutes are how strong they are, because this is not an easy exercise. This is a supine hip extension back on floor. And so the arms can determine the difficulty of it. So in the picture, this is least hardest, and then you could cross your arms in front of your chest to make it a little bit harder, and then you can also take your arms and cross into your chest so that the upper arms are not on the floor, which really turns on even more stability as it relates to being on a stable floor, but adding stability to the body by activation. So when you go into hip extension first, and then if they're ready, they can go into knee flexion, which makes it quite a bit harder. And as they do that, it's important to watch for the shoulder, the knee, and the hip all being in one line. If there's weakness, you're going to see the button or the hip not being able to come up and full activation and create that straight line. Also, you might see a torsion. Okay, so one side's weaker than the other. Important to watch that when they're doing it. If you were to progress that level or phase 1 exercise, you could really take it to the next level and ask them to do a single leg hip extension back on floor, which is bang on tough and isolative. So the exercise to the right, it is a medicine ball squat to a press, which is a loaded exercise. And for that particular exercise, it doesn't show up, but in order to really get the hip action, you could make it more of a power exercise, and they could leave the ground and jump with that, and it would really activate the glutes for what you're looking for. Part 2, let's go into some more exercises. So what a great exercise. If you're looking for stabilization, a neurological exercise, a phase 2 exercise, this would be an excellent activation exercise to kind of charge and turn everything on, specifically in the squat pattern, as you can see. So say there was in your rehab some dysfunction in the glute. Say there was dysfunction also shown quite a bit in the squat pattern. And so stabilization was the key issue. Once you've got that all integrated, put them on a Swiss ball and really charge it up to work before you put them into their loaded squat pattern. This will be a great activation for setting them up. Okay, so this can be a lunge or specifically be a split squat. Essentially, it's harder than a squat because of the splicing in the SI joint, but also very much isolating that posterior chain of lumbar, glutes, and hamstrings. Excellent. And so this particular side is saying one thing. Don't be afraid to lift heavy weights to try to develop glutes. The glute activation, you're going to need a high stimulus, so you're going to need heavy weights. It's going to be important for the goal of hypertrophy of the glutes. Okay, so good mornings. Great posterior chain exercise. She's got it loaded. The only suggestion here, two things. One, make sure that load or bar is below is at about T1. Don't forget C6 can anterior shift, and so you don't want to load on that segment. Secondly, you've got a 15 to 20 degree knee bend. And so from there, as she hinges forward from the hip, she's hinging to the degree that she doesn't flex her lumbar spine. Very good form, great exercise for the glutes and the posterior chain for that matter. Some power exercises, and this is what we were talking about before. Really, to get this glute the best way with this high stimulus would be to do power step-ups. And so this lady demonstrates that very well. One thing to consider, because the glute's a phasic muscle, you want to be able to do these for like a whole minute. So you want to, you're talking about 10, 20 seconds. And if you can do 10 of these and not lose 10% of function, then you're not doing it hard enough. So when she steps up onto that bench, she does power off the bench and then come back down and then step down to the floor. So great exercise for glute max. Okay, so we talked about jogging on the treadmill and walking on the treadmill. Doesn't quite get it, but if you were to go out to a track or go outside and do sprints, 40-meter sprints, that would be an excellent exercise for working that whole hip flexion extension chain for also hypertrophy of the glutes. Okay, so this particular exercise is an isolated exercise. So it's really more for the glute med in men. It's also for something we just referenced as the Trendelenburg. So if you've got someone where you see this type of dysfunction, this is a great exercise to isolate and work that whole hip aspect in the frontal plane. I feel like one of the deficient planes that people tend to not work as much is the frontal plane. So I love lateral lunges, and I love this particular exercise that challenges it with a cable. And so those two exercises, I would also highly recommend a wood chop because the wood chop has a lateral lunge in it, and it has a bend, and it also has a twist in it. Fantastic for that whole glute. We talked about hip extension back on floor. Well, this is hip extension back on ball. Two really, really great exercises. Like I said before, it is an exercise and it's also a test. It's a mini assessment to see the strength of that glute and the ability to lift that hip up and into extension and level. So if you do see somebody doing that and there's a slight drop in the pelvis, we can remind them verbally and see if it actually is just unconscious. And if if it is, then they'll correct it and it won't happen again. Or we can see it repeatedly and also determine that there's a weak side. Make sure we're checking on the pelvic rotation to see if that's not the root of it, and then go back to refacilitating with the hip extension. How we can make this harder is you can do the single leg. Oftentimes I feel like people need a transition with this, so transitioning by using 2 dowel rods and then basically 1 dowel rod for a number of weeks until they can do it on their own. Big bang exercise works all planes, so we got sagittal, frontal, and transverse plane being worked with the supine lateral ball roll, and this can be done. Even though it's a phase 1 exercise, it is super hard. And ideally, you only move lateral as far as you can maintain, ideally 10 seconds on each side for 3 reps for 2 to 3 sets. And really, the power of the hips in this particular exercise are what's important for keeping the body out of the transverse plane or the twist pattern. So really important exercise and super beneficial in a phase 1 manner for the posterior chain. So if you want a better butt, you'll ultimately get a better body, because your program includes stabilization in all planes. You eventually will lift for strength. Always use the power for the point of maximizing utilization of glutes. Performance and then aesthetics is a byproduct. You look fabulous when you train with all these parameters that the CHEK system offers you. Thanks for listening to this lecture on fabulous butts. I hope you got something out of it to help yourself or with your clients. And we'll see you at the next CHEK course.